Honorable Sina Lawson, Minister of Digital Economy and Digital Transformation, Togo. Mansour Hamayoun, co-founder and chairman, Minex.
Thank you very much. And especially I want to thank my former boss and my role model, Dr. Lassina Zerbo, for inviting me to Rwanda. It's been a real fantastic experience, and again, a great honor to moderate also this panel today. I wanted just to put into perspective this panel by just giving you a sense of how relevant Africa will be, not only for itself, but for the entire international community moving forward. By 2050, there will be roughly 9.5 billion people on Earth, and 25% of them will live in Africa. And by the end of this century, 40% of the whole population in the world will live in Africa. This means that challenges like sustainable development, technological innovation, digital transformation will have to find critical solutions here, and will actually have then a spearheading role around the world. So when we talk about the African energy revolution, we are not only talking about this regional revolution, but we are talking about a global revolution as a whole. So it is extraordinarily important for everyone beyond Africa to understand what is going on here, and to understand how African leaders think about innovation, tackling the challenges that they confront. So I wanted to start with you, Minister Ingabire. You are the Minister of ICT and Innovation of our host country, Rwanda, and you have thought a lot about innovation. Director General Grossi reminded us that investing in the future means also tackling competing priorities: development, energy security, technology. You have worked on innovation, and I wanted to ask you if you can reflect a little bit about what innovation means to you, and some examples of where you have been the most successful in innovating in Rwanda, especially in relation to energy financing, for example.
Thank you very much, Francesca, and good morning to everyone. Starting off with the question, in as much as we think about energy security, innovation, and many other things as competing, you can also look at them also as complementary, and it depends on how you choose to tackle and address some of these. When you look at innovations and what is really fueling the technological landscape today globally, you're seeing artificial intelligence. And at the heart of artificial intelligence is the need for massive data sets, is the need for sufficient and reliable energy. You just gave us some good statistics around what population growth is going to look like in a couple of years. But when you also look at what the current electrification gap looks like and the current gap when it comes to financing energy, you start to see an opportunity where, as we make sure that we're thinking about the future, which is going to be heavily disrupted or modeled with digital technologies and innovations, how then do we use that as a catalyst or as a catalyst for the kind of investments that we need to make? And this is where we see almost like the beautiful fusion or cohesion of both AI and energy, and nuclear particularly, as we think about clean energy solutions that are going to power some of these innovations. Now, back to your question, for Rwanda, it's been a deliberate choice for us and decision to make sure that we put technology and innovations center and front of what we're doing as a government. And that enables us, one, to stay competitive, but two, to also make sure that we're leveraging digital technologies in a way that will allow us to grow in different aspects of society. We've also been a country over the last couple of years, because we started in 2000, really with this very deliberate strategy where we're leveraging digital technologies to drive public service delivery. Today we are thinking about how we use data to inform both the policies that we are making as a government, but also data to inform some of the implementation and the work that we're doing. And data remains very core to some of the conversations that we're having here today, because you need data to model and predict what the demand is going to look like. you need data to give the certainty that the demand is there and for the investments to happen. You need data when you're thinking about de-risking some of these investments. And so we continue to put emphasis as a government in terms of how do we become a proof of concept country where we can test and try many solutions that are digital, even non-digital solutions, as long as they are creating value and transforming the society as a whole.
Thank you very much. I want to build on precisely the point the Minister was making about the importance of data and asking you, Minister Lawson, you have led digital transformation in Togo for over 10 years. Togo has been recognized with Rwanda as one of the most innovative when it comes to thinking about digital platforms. Can you give us a sense of how much the rise of data centers, AI research, is really driving energy needs in your country and maybe in the continent, and how much does this really increase the need for energy security?
Good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure for me to be here and to actually return to Rwanda. Last time I was here, it was for the AI Summit, and it's very relevant to the conversation that we have today. First of all, as our countries become more and more digitized, we need data centers. 10 years ago, when Togo did not have a national data center, and when we built the business model, even for us to have one, we found out that we needed, as a state, to subsidize the construction of this data center, because most experts would tell us that it wasn't really needed at that point. But we took it upon ourselves to say, you know what, we think it's very important for us to have it, and it's a build and they will come situation, so let's just fund this effort. And we were actually fortunate that we approached the World Bank and say that we wanted to work with them to have a bit of funding to invest in this new data center. And fast forward today, it's an infrastructure that not only the state uses, but the private sector, et cetera, et cetera. And moving forward and thinking of all the projects that we're working towards, having, for example, in the health sector, a health information center to implement AI within government. These data centers, because now we have more than one, are proving very critical. But then when you think that data centers are critical, then the next question is, how do you power them? The cost of electricity is extremely, is a very large part of the cost of running these data centers. And a lot of discussions that we have moving, thinking of the future was, we need to secure reliable, very cheap energy source. And so that's how myself, as the Minister of Digital Transformation, I entered the conversations with regards to nuclear, because yes, I think we are the second largest producer of solar energy in sub-Saharan Africa, with Amea Power. So we've been looking into renewables and other energy sources, but if we think of becoming relevant as a country, as a region, as a continent with regards to digital transformation and AI, we absolutely need to invest in nuclear power and nuclear power generation. So that's one aspect of it. And then the second aspect of it is, as a country, how do you fund such an effort? So the financing aspect was one of extremely critical. When we started the conversation with Dr. Zerbo a few years ago, it was all about how to be able to fund this effort, and whether international organizations such as the World Bank and others would understand the importance of it. So it's a very recent, the recent change of heart of the World Bank is going to be of great support for what we're trying to do.
Fantastic. Mansour, I come to you. You are a business person. You have invested in many domains. And it seems to me that Africa is undergoing an extraordinary digital revolution, and it might be at the cusp of an energy revolution. But we are also talking about industrialization and the need to maintain also industries. Can you help us think through this? How do you see this revolution going on, and what do you think Africa needs to do really, and in what way they can accelerate, in fact, nuclear investments?
No, thank you so much. I think there's a few things to start with. I spent my first part of my life providing electricity to the rural poor, people that don't have any access to using kerosene, candles, etc. And through innovation, many thanks to both ministers sitting here, the spread of mobile money, telecom, etc., what the magic that happened was that people were able to pay payments with their phones. And we installed solar systems and batteries in people's households, so when they pay small amounts of money, the system turns on. When they don't pay, the system turns off. And that sort of pay-as-you-go system became extremely successful. In Rwanda, for example, 20% of all households use our system. In Togo, 10% of all households use our system. But there's a limitation to that story, which is that it is a great solution to provide comfort at the household level for people to live a decent and acceptable life. But what it doesn't allow is the industrialization of the country. And when we start talking about industrialization, the real challenge becomes access to energy, cheap energy, abundant energy, etc. And large part of my life I've spent raising capital from outside and putting that capital back into the African system. We have deployed more than $500 million of capital in 10 countries over the last 10 years. But the real source of capital is beneath the ground in Africa to begin with. All the mineral resources that are here, the agricultural resources that are here, but the value capture doesn't really happen because the access to abundant, cheap energy is not possible. And I'll tell you my best kept secret, which is that Africa is actually the most innovative continent on Earth. Innovation happens here first, and the rest of the world absorbs. And that's true. I mean, both ministers here on stage I'm very grateful to because the telecom revolution itself is a great example of it. The first place where two phones could make a payment to each other at scale was Kenya, as an example. So the fact that we're having this conversation about nuclear here today and the innovation that needs to take place, both technically, policy-wise, financial innovation, I am certain that Africa can not just be the customer of such solution, but a driving force of such thing taking place. So the industrialization element is critical. And maybe one last thing is that in Europe, we talk about deindustrialization or the growing deindustrialization of Europe. The exciting thing about Africa is that exactly the opposite conversation. It's about how do we build more factories, do more processing, more things, and the demand for energy is going to grow tremendously, and that's where nuclear should fit rightly into that equation.
Fantastic, thank you. That's really an interesting perspective. I wanted to go to you, Mr. Ngambire, and I wanted to ask you your perspective about regional cooperation. Director General Grossi was reminding us that if you want to invest in nuclear energy, you need infrastructures, you need certain expertise in the labor force, you need a safety and security culture, all things, of course, the milestone and the DIA has produced in order to help countries on their nuclear journey. I wanted to ask you, from your experience, where do you see the greatest value for regional cooperation? So how can regional cooperation be strengthened so that individual African countries can in fact achieve these milestones?
Mm-hmm. I think a starting point is when you think about regional cooperation, on the policy side, you're looking at what kind of policies and regulations do we need to harmonize, but also because we're talking about a capital-intensive industry, it's also understanding if we're going to de-risk investments, if we're going to be an attractive block for some of these investments, what is needed to be in place so that scale is possible across the continent. Many of the investors that are going to be building some of the small and modular reactors are going to look for scale. And what does scale look like from one country to another? Are there policies that we need to be thinking about in terms of harmonization? Do we need to think collectively about what demand is going to look like? Because even as you think, maybe just to pivot a little bit, when you look at the current financing gap, we're talking about annually about 30 billion. Now, when you think about it at a country perspective and the amount of investments that are needed to invest in some of these SMRs, This is where the need for regional cooperation comes in, because you're able to pull in some of the much needed resources as you attract the investments to come in. Earlier we were talking about, where we see the intersection of nuclear, AI, and all of these innovations. And just to give an example, think about the Google searches that we do on a daily basis. For each Google search, you at least need about 0.003 kilowatts of energy. But as you think about ChatGPT, which is now becoming mainstream everyday tool that everyone is using, you need 10 times that capacity. And you may think it's too little or small, but when we think about the scale, which is where we're now thinking about the regional angle, today you have over 3.5 billion Google searches that are happening on a daily basis. This is not annual. So it means in terms of energy demand, you're looking at about at least more than 1 gigawatt of energy that is needed daily to power, these Google searches. When it comes to ChatGPT, which needs more than 10 times that capacity, you have over 200 million of such prompts happening on a daily basis, and that will mean that you need at least 300 gigawatts of energy. So thinking about all of that comes the question where, as different countries, we're thinking about deploying AI solutions, we're thinking about the compute infrastructure that Minister Sina talked about that is required to power some of these ambitions that we're looking for. I think the financing question then comes into play on how do we then, and there's always been conversations, especially in the tech side, where the thinking for, there's two schools of thought. One school of thought is around, let's just have regional hubs and the rest of you can get compute infrastructure from the regional hubs. But it's a question of sovereignty. Every country would like to build this capacity for itself. And so when we come together as a regional bloc, we're able to look at what is this demand going to look like, and if we're going to jointly mobilize financing for this and build these technologies and build that capacity and the policies that are needed to support this kind of investment, then you're better off doing it as a whole, as opposed to individually trying to tackle the same challenges that we're all facing.
Thank you. Very interesting, the tension between regional cooperation but also national sovereignty, which remains really important. Minister Lawson, I wanted to continue a conversation you and I had yesterday about the digital revolution in Africa, the shortage of labor force. And I wanted to ask your view about government support innovation. There is, I think, a Western idea that innovation comes from the private sector and the government, in a way, implements most of the innovation. But I know you have been a big champion of government-led innovation. Can you give us a sense of how do you think the government can play a real role in this energy transition?
So the conversation we had yesterday was a bit of a history of electricity, of the rise of electricity in the West, which was in which. And I really believe that electricity was made possible in the West because it served to power industries. Whereas in our continent, when we look at electricity, most of the time people will talk to you about powering households. And so the rise of electricity, the funding of electricity, which has historically been linked to funding industries, having off-takers, is, becomes an issue on a continent where you don't have enough industries. And so one way to look at all these conversations is what kind of industries do we need to grow on the continent in our countries so that we have enough revenues to fund anything else, and so that infrastructure can then be supporting these industries. And so it was more this conversation, which is how do we make sure that what we do is relevant and we're really following the natural path of things, where you have natural resources that you transform to build industries, and then these industries provide the business case for funding infrastructure, and power being one infrastructure. And if we think in those terms, then it's no longer a matter of funding electricity, it's about understanding the system in which this energy is going to be relevant. And so when we, this conversation is a very important one when we talk about nuclear energy, because then what's the business case for nuclear energy on the continent if we don't industrialize our continent? And so that was the main. Now, when we talk about innovation, obviously we need to think in an innovative manner. Starting the day-to-day, we talked about the change of heart of the World Bank, and yes, it's a great thing. Yesterday, Mansour, during your panel, you said something very important, which is for projects that are so critical for our development, should we rely upon other people's money? Because other people, other institutions can have change of hearts. So innovation has to be us thinking really through who we are, where we want to be 10, 15 years down the road, and how to structure ourselves in order to use our own money to fund our dreams. And so I would say that's where we need to be innovative. What kind of new financing models should we put in place in order to make sure that not only today, but 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, 15 years down the road, we have enough money to get where we want to go? Because when we talk about, for example, the UAE, that now 25% of their energy is provided by nuclear, they had a lot of money, and it was they had a long-term view of how to get there. And what is needed today and what is required from us Africans is to be able to stay the course, because we're talking about nuclear, and quite frankly, we're very excited to talk about nuclear, but it's going to happen in 10 years, in 15 years. So how do we stay the course?
How do we remain committed to that grand strategy?
To the cause. And fund it over time so that we don't run out of money 10 years, in 10 years, or we need to be able to fund it all the way. And so it requires partnership with industries that are going to be off-takers, but it requires to have real industrial policies so that there is stability in the relationship with these off-takers.
Fantastic. So let me conclude the panel with a last question to you, Mansour, which is really about the stakeholder engagement. We have international organizations here. We have, of course, national governments. We have the private sector. We have academia. Can you reflect a little bit about what you think are the best practices in stakeholder engagement? What are processes that might actually, in fact, lead to this grand strategy, vision that the minister was talking about?
Of course, vision and leadership is critical, because if you, as Minister Larsen has mentioned, you need to set the course for the next 10, 15, 20 years. So strong leadership and commitment to the project is important. But the other thing is important as well is ownership. I really believe in that this project cannot be outsourced to some other company, another entity to, hey, this place looks good, come and try to build it and you solve the problem. So taking really ownership over the course. When I say ownership, I mean in two elements. I also believe that Africa has a real opportunity today to actually take ownership of the technology as well. One of the conversations I've been missing over the last 2 days, in my personal opinion, is that why can our African companies, African governments not fund nuclear innovation that is fit for context? So it's not just about putting a power plant in their own country, but it's about exporting technology, nuclear technology of the future to other places as well. That also comes with human capital development as well. Then the big elephant in the room, of course, is the role between government, the private sector, and the financing community. And that needs to align properly. But unlike in a solar business where you can spread your risk over 10 places, right? And if one country goes down, another country performs better, you're sort of hedging your risk. In a nuclear power plant, you're really getting married very quickly, right? And the dating period is very short here, right? Before you get into it. So I think having this sort of conversations, building the foundations right, setting the rules of the game properly, and having the government's ownership. And I say that as a private sector operator. In this case, the thing that would give me comfort to invest in this sector would to see that the government really has taken ownership over the project. Whatever happens, the project will get delivered. And that is the comfort that investors, I think, need to be able to overcome it.
Fantastic. I want to close by saying, I think these 2 days have given us a lot of enthusiasm for what is happening here in this continent. Yes, the challenges are great, but the impact could be extraordinary. And as Mansoud said, Africa has turned out to be the most innovative continent, and so we can count on Africa to play a fundamental role in the next generation of nuclear power. Please join me in thanking this wonderful panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Paula, Honorable Sina, Mansour, and Giovanni. That was a wonderful conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for being part of this very important conversation. A lot has come out of that. I want to give a special appreciation to their excellencies for honoring us with your presence this morning. Thank you so much. And Mr. Rafael Grossi for sharing your insights with us. And